The decree was signed at dawn. Calum Draveth did not sleep the night before he exiled his mate. He sat at the long table in his war room, the candles burning low, the parchment flat in front of him, and he told himself he was certain. A king had to be certain. That was the first thing his father had taught him, in a cold room very much like this one, a long time ago. He pressed his seal into the wax. The mark of the northern throne. A wolf crowned in iron. Done. Seren was brought to the throne room at dawn, still in the clothes she had slept in. Her dark hair was loose. Her feet were bare on the stone floor. 2 royal guards stood at her sides, not touching her, but close enough that the message was clear. Calum read the decree himself. He had decided that much. If he was going to do this, he would face it. He looked at her face when he spoke. He did not look at her stomach. That was the part he could not afford to look at. When he finished reading, the room was silent. His court stood along the walls, heads bowed slightly, the way they bowed when something was happening that they did not want to be remembered as having watched. She did not raise her voice. She stood with her hands loose at her sides, and she looked at him the way you look at something you once believed in, and have now finished believing in. "You will know," she said quietly. "When you are ready to know, you will." Then she walked through the doors they opened for her, and out through the gates, and down the long road that led away from everything she had been. The iron gates shut behind her. The sound they made, heavy and final, was the same sound Calum's father's coffin lid had made, 12 years ago in this same hall. He did not understand why he thought of that. He folded the thought away and turned back to his court and said nothing. It was 3 days of walking before Seren crossed into Leia's territory. She had taken nothing from the palace that was not already hers. A traveling cloak, a small knife. The knowledge that she was 3 months along and that the child inside her was real, and hers, regardless of what any decree said about the rest. She was found by a border patrol on the 4th morning, 2 soldiers in green cloaks who spotted her sitting against an oak tree near a frozen stream, resting her feet. They were young. They looked at her the way young soldiers look at things they were not trained for. They brought her to their camp, and their captain sent a message to the king. Evander Luce came himself. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that moved quickly between expressions, nothing hidden, nothing performed. He came into the camp and looked at her, and asked one question. "What do you need first?" Not who are you, not where did you come from, not what happened. What do you need first? Seren had been holding herself together very carefully for 4 days. Something about the simplicity of that question, the order it implied, the patience behind it, almost undid her. Almost. "Warm food," she said, "and a room with a door that locks from the inside." He nodded. "Both of those are easy." The room he gave her was small and clean and faced east, so the morning light came in early. The door had a bolt, thick iron, and she locked it that first night, and stood with her hand on it for a long time, feeling the solidity of it. It was the first solid thing she had felt in days. Lysander was born in late winter, in a room down the hall from Evander's own chambers, because Seren had asked to be close to the center of the building, and Evander had simply rearranged whatever needed rearranging to make that possible. Evander was in the great hall when the sound came, a newborn's first cry, sharp and indignant, cutting straight through 2 stone walls and a corridor. He stood up from the table. Sat back down. Stood up again. When they finally let him into the room, the boy was wrapped in wool and furious about it, small fists working at the air. Seren was exhausted and watchful. Evander stood at the foot of the bed for a moment. He did not reach for the child. He waited to be invited. Seren looked at him for a moment, then lifted the boy slightly, just an inch, which was invitation enough. He sat on the edge of the chair beside the bed and held Lysander for the first time, and the boy stopped fighting the wool and went very still, and Evander looked down at this small, furious face and made a decision that cost him nothing that night and everything in the years after. He kept that decision to himself, but his court understood it, the way courts always understand the things their kings don't say aloud. Lysander grew up running through the halls of the Lys fortress. He was loud and curious, and convinced that horses could understand him if he spoke slowly enough. He had his mother's eyes, dark gray, direct, slow to trust, and a jaw that Saren recognized from somewhere she did not name, not even to herself, not even in the quiet parts of the night. Evander taught him to ride when he was 4, sitting behind him on the saddle the first time so Lysander could feel what the balance was supposed to feel like. He taught him star maps at 6, spreading them out on the great hall floor because the table wasn't big enough. He taught him to play chess at 7, and lost badly and often, and received this with great dignity. When Lysander beat him for the first time at age 9, a clean, genuine win, no kindness shown, Evander pushed back from the table and crossed his arms and looked at the board for a long moment. Then he said, "Where did you learn that?" "From watching you," Lysander said. Evander laughed so hard the guards outside the door leaned in to check that everything was fine. Saren, sitting in the window with a book, set the book face down in her lap and looked away, because the feeling in her chest was too big for the room and she didn't know what to do with it. Calum found the thread 18 months after the exile. It was a minor court official who pulled it loose first, a man going through records from a trade dispute, who noticed a discrepancy in a payment made to an informant. Calum pulled the thread himself after that. It took him 4 months of careful, quiet work, dismantling the chain of people who had lied to him, link by link. The faction had been afraid of a queen mate's influence, afraid of what Saren might become if she took root beside him in power. So, they had invented a rival bloodline, a whispered rumor, a fabricated witness, and they had fed it to a king they knew was proud enough to act before he thought. They had been right about that. Calum sat alone in his war room the night he confirmed the final piece, the same room where he had pressed his seal into the wax, and he did not blow out the candles, and he did not sleep, and he did not move for a very long time. He thought about what she had said. "You will know. When you are ready to know, you will." She had not said if. She had known, already, that the truth was in there somewhere, waiting. She had not begged him to find it before he signed. She had simply known it would come, and she had walked. That thought sat in him like a stone in still water, permanent, reshaping everything around it, changing nothing on the surface. Lysander was 12 when the Alliance Summit brought both kingdoms to the same table. He stood in the receiving line in his best green coat, slightly too formal, slightly too stiff around the shoulders, in the way of boys who are still growing into their own limbs. He shook hands with visiting lords and officials, and smiled the way Evander had taught him to smile, genuinely, briefly, the kind of smile that made people feel seen without lingering. When he reached the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, he extended his hand and looked the man directly in the eye. And Calum shook his hand. He looked at the boy's jaw. He looked at it for 1 second longer than he should have, and then he said something forgettable and pleasant, and Lysander nodded and moved on to the next person in line, because he was 12 and he had 3 more hours of this, and he had already spotted a display of maps in the far hall that he wanted to examine. He had no reason to linger. He did not know. He had no context for knowing. He was simply a boy at a summit, doing what his father had taught him. Calum watched him walk away. That evening, Calum sent a formal request for a private meeting with Saren. She agreed. She arrived at the designated room at the designated time, poured herself tea from the tray that had been left, and sat down across from him. She did not pour his. She waited. "I know what I did," Calum said. "I know how it happened. I know who was responsible." "I know you do," Saren said. "I assumed you'd find it eventually." He looked at her. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not." She held her cup with both hands. "You're a thorough man. You were just thorough in the wrong direction at the wrong time." He was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry." "I know," she said, and she sounded as though she meant that, as though she believed him, and the belief changed nothing, and she was not angry about that. She had simply moved past the place where his apology could do anything useful. "Lysander," he said. The name felt strange in his mouth. He had read it in official documents. He had never said it aloud until now. "Yes. He doesn't know." "He doesn't know," she said. "He knows Evander is his father. He knows it the way a child knows the ground is solid, not as information, as experience." Calum looked at the table. "I would not change it," Saren said quietly. even if I could. I need you to understand that before you say anything else." He understood it. He did not like what understanding it meant for him, but he understood it completely, because he was, when stripped of everything else, a man who respected the truth when it finally arrived. "What do you need from me?" he asked. She looked at him calmly. "Nothing. That's the answer you made for me when you signed the decree. I've built everything I need." He had no answer for that. There was no answer. She was not being cruel. She was being accurate, which was so much worse. He returned to his kingdom and spent 2 months doing the thing he had never been taught, sitting with something unresolved. His advisors noticed. His court noticed. He moved through his days fully, did his work, handled his responsibilities. But there was something different in the way he paused before speaking now, something that had not been there before. He dismantled the faction publicly. Every person involved, every link in the chain, dealt with fully and on the record. It was just, and it was also far too late, and he knew both of those things at the same time. He stood before his court and revoked the exile decree himself. He read it aloud. He did not explain it. No one asked him to. The room was very quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight and texture, the kind that means everyone in it is holding something they have decided not to say. The official document was sent to Saren through the proper channels. She received it in Evander's study, where she had been going over supply records. She held the paper and read it once. Then she set it on the desk beside her and looked out the window at the courtyard below, where Lysander was arguing cheerfully with a stable boy about something that involved a great deal of arm movement. After a while, she picked the document back up and set it on Evander's side of the desk, because he had a right to know, and because some things should not be held alone, and because she had learned, slowly, over 12 years, what it felt like to have someone who treated her thoughts as worth sharing. Lysander learned the truth at 15. Not from his mother, not from Evander, from a visiting court woman who did not realize what she was handling, who said something at dinner that she thought was common knowledge and was not. He came to Evander that night. He sat in the chair across from him in the study, the same chair where they had played 1,000 games of chess, and he asked, plainly, whether it was true. Evander looked at him steadily. Yes. Lysander was quiet for a while. The fire in the hearth moved and settled. "Tell me everything," he said, not as a boy asking to be comforted, as someone who wanted the complete picture. Evander told him. All of it. He did not soften the parts that reflected poorly on Calum, but he did not make them larger than they were either. When he finished, he said, "None of it changes what I know about you, or what you know about me. I have been your father for 15 years, and I am not stopping because of a piece of information." Lysander looked at the fire for a long time. Then he said, "Okay." One word, but it carried everything. They met once more, Calum and Lysander, when the boy was 17. Lysander had requested it himself, which surprised Calum more than anything else in the whole long story of his own mistakes. They sat across from each other in a neutral room in a neutral city. Lysander looked at him the way you look at a map of a country you have studied carefully, but decided not to visit. Curious, thorough, not unkind. "I wanted to understand what kind of man makes that decision," Lysander said. "Not to blame you. I've already worked out how I feel about you. I just wanted to understand." Calum answered him honestly. Every part of it. He did not protect himself from a single question. When they were done, Lysander stood and extended his hand, and Calum shook it, and Lysander walked out of the room with the even, unhurried stride of a young man who knew exactly where he was going. Calum sat in the empty room for a while after. The truth, he had learned, did not always arrive in time to be useful. Sometimes it arrived exactly when it was supposed to, after the world had already rearranged itself into something better than what you broke. He sat with that. Then he stood, straightened his coat, and went back to the work of being a king, which was the only thing, in the end, he had ever known how to do without anyone's help.